The AUR or Arch User Repository is an incredibly useful resource for every single Arch Linux user, but I've noticed that especially a lot of new Arch users sort of misunderstand what it actually is and what it's actually used for. So today I thought I would try to clear up some of that confusion, and even if you have been using Arch for quite a while like I have been, I still hope there's something of value you take away from this video. I'm just going to assume you have no idea what it is at all. So stripped back to its absolute core, all the AUR is a server that has a bunch of Git repos on it, and then you can go and pull those Git repos and use it to install some software. No different from anything else you could run yourself. What makes the AUR special is what is inside of those Git repos. Now, these repos on the AUR don't actually contain the application source code or relevant documentation for the application. What they contain is, at minimum, two different files. Those files are the .src info and the package build. Now, there can be some other files that are included as well, but these are just things that are used by the package build. Here's an example of an AUR package. So ignoring the .git folder and the .gitignore, which are just there to make sure that the repo actually works properly, the .source info basically is the metadata for the package. So if you go to the AUR website, you'll notice there'll be things like, say, a description of the package version number, where the source code actually comes from, and a bunch of other things for how to actually use the package. That is basically being defined inside of this file right here. You don't really need to check out what's in this file, but if you do want to see that information, it can be checked there. The important file, though, is the package build. The package build is responsible for doing things like fetching the source code in the case of an application that needs to be compiled, but sometimes you might download binary applications from the AUR. In that case, it's going to have to go and download the binary. If it has some dependencies, all of the dependencies will need to be listed out in here, and then those will be downloaded during the installation process. This is both the build dependencies and also the run dependencies as well. If there is some documentation, say in the form of man pages, that will be downloaded by the package build as well. If the application needs to be compiled in the case of source code, then it will be compiled by the package build. And once that's been done, it'll be placed in the correct location on your system for that binary to exist. Generally, that's going to be in your /bin directory, but there are things besides applications that can be downloaded from the AUR, so not everything will end up in your /bin. And the last thing that needs to be done is the package needs to be linked to Pacman. Now, you may have noticed at the top of the package build, the exact same information we just saw in the .source info. Now, the reason why it's like this is because the .source info isn't actually written by hand. In the creation of the AUR package, the .source info actually gets generated from the contents of the package build. Now, sometimes the developer of the application will be the one who makes the AUR package, but it's far, far more likely for just a regular user like you and me to decide, okay, I made this build script so it's going to be easier for me to install it. It's probably going to be useful if other people have this as well, and then they turn that into an AUR package, and that is how the vast majority of packages get made. Now, even though I download the most random applications out there for the sake of testing in videos, I haven't downloaded a package build that was trying to do something malicious, but this doesn't mean that the AUR is completely safe. Because just anybody out there can go and make an AUR package, this does mean that sometimes there might be malicious code you're going to download. So whenever you download something from the AUR, make sure you at least do a rudimentary lookover of the package build to make sure it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. Some obvious things you can look for is where the source code or binary is being downloaded from. In this case, I know that this right here is the official repo for LF, and all it's doing is just downloading R20, which is the version it wants to download for this specific version of the package. There's no problem with that running, that's perfectly fine. Also, make sure that you don't just have random commands running that shouldn't really be running. For example, let's say you just have a random rm command in here that's just gonna, delete your home directory, or just delete some random folder that shouldn't be deleted by the package. In that case, that's probably something that shouldn't be in here, but it's pretty easy to spot. Also, just check the dependencies. If there's a dependency in here that seems a little bit off, there might be something weird going on with the package. But for packages that are fairly popular, there's going to be at least 1 or 2 people in the comment section saying, okay, this probably shouldn't be here, and that line here and there should be removed. The smaller packages, though, like say random printer drivers, make sure you're always checking the package build just to make sure it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. Now, the Arch team isn't going around and auditing AUR packages, so if you go and download something that is going to break your system, that is entirely your fault, and you should have made sure that wasn't going to happen. But that doesn't mean that the AUR is just a complete mess and no one is moderating it, because there are these people called trusted users. In short, a trusted user is an AUR moderator. Basically, these are community members who are responsible for keeping the AUR in a working order. Basically, they're going to be maintaining the really popular packages. If there needs to be a vote on any administrative issues, they will be involved in that. Say there's a package, for example, that just downloads malware. They actually have the power to go and remove this. But do keep in mind that the trusted users are just volunteers, so they shouldn't be relied on for safety. You should always be responsible for checking the package build because they may not have got to it yet. Now, one thing you might be confused about is why the AUR doesn't actually store the applications you're going to be downloading, because as we established earlier, it's just a server that has a bunch of Git repos on it. There's no reason why the source code couldn't be on it. There's a couple of reasons for this, but one of them is that it would get very, very expensive to go and do so. So let's say, for example, you have a bunch of web browsers and desktop environments and other really big applications like this, and you have thousands of people trying to download these every single day. While this can be done, it's going to massively increase the costs, and the AUR is just a community effort, and there's no reason to go and make that cost higher than it actually needs to be, especially when those applications are already being stored in a separate location. So whether that's on GitHub or GitLab or just some random Git server out there, it's already being hosted, so wouldn't it make more sense to just go and download it from that server rather than going and double hosting it? Plus, if it was being hosted on the AUR, this would make updates far more complex. So you'd have to go and update it on your server and then push all of those updates to the AUR server, once again increasing costs for absolutely no reason. The other issue though is licensing issues. So for random FOSS applications, this would be perfectly fine. There's probably no reason why you couldn't have the source code in two locations, but let's say you have something proprietary. Let's say you have a AUR package for, I don't know, Spotify. Spotify controls how they distribute the binary, and they want to distribute it from their website. So if you were to go and store that binary on the AUR, you'd be breaking Spotify's terms of service, and that would open up the Arch team to a lawsuit, which really doesn't need to happen. So it just makes more sense to go and download it from the place it's supposed to be downloaded from. Now, once you've found an AUR package you want to install, there's two ways you can go and do so. One of them is by doing it manually. The second way is by using an AUR helper. Now, AUR helpers are not actually endorsed by the Arch team, so this is why you'll never see them in the main repos. So it's suggested that every single Arch user should know how to manually install an AUR package, just in case something breaks and they need to go and do so. To install manually, all you really need to do is run git clone on the AUR package you want to download, and then run the make package command to go and install the package. But AUR helpers do make it really convenient to do things like, say, searching for new packages or updating packages, and I definitely prefer using them over doing it manually. As of the recording of this video in February 2021, the two main AUR helpers are Yay and Peru. Some people still go and use things like, say, Yowit, but Yowit isn't really being updated as much anymore. There are plenty of other AUR helpers out there. These are just the popular ones. Now, when you do install something with an AUR helper, I highly suggest enabling package build reviews, because otherwise you're going to install something with the AUR helper as if you're installing something with Pac-Man and not actually know what's going on in the package build, and this is where you can go and do something really dangerous. While it is going to be different for every AUR helper worth using has some way to go and enable package build reviews. Now, while the AUR is primarily for software packages, whether that be source code or binary, certain other content is permitted as well. So, for example, a config file for an application, online or offline documentation for specific software or Arch Linux itself, and media intended to be used directly by software, under the condition that the package will actually be useful. And useful is very loosely defined. Basically, if the package might be used by more than a few people, this would be considered useful, and this criteria also applies to software on the AUR as well. Here's a couple of examples of things that aren't software that may be permitted. Now, I'm not going to say they're absolutely permitted, but this is the way that I understand the rules. So if someone wants to go and make an AUR package that installed all of DistroTube's .dot files, this would be allowed. Or say, for example, you wanted to go and install some extended man pages for some random application, this would be allowed as well. Or let's say you wanted to install a new language dictionary for your input method editor, this would also be allowed as well. Now, while there are plenty of other rules about how to name your package or structure your package build, there are a couple of important rules you do need to remember. One of those is that if you do want to make an AUR package, do not make a duplicate package. Now, you may have seen things like a -bin package and a -git package. So, for example, lf-bin and lf-git. Even though they're both downloading the same application, these are allowed because they're downloading the application in a different form. The -git package downloads the source code, whereas the -bin package downloads the binary. Now, something I've seen from people who aren't Arch users or users of an Arch derivative like, say, Arco or Manjaro is why the AUR can only be used by Arch-based distros. Because really, most of the installation process is fairly distro-independent, so if you're on something like Debian, you can go and run git clone on an AUR package and go and download it on that system, but you're not going to have a way to actually run the package build because this is done by make package, and make package is an application that's a part of Pacman. So this does mean that make package wouldn't work, but there's nothing stopping some other distro going and making some way to actually interpret the package build and having its own build system that interacts with its package manager. It's just that no other distro I know of has gone and done so. Now, hopefully that gives you a bit of a better understanding about what the AUR actually is, and if you're not an Arch Linux user and maybe you're on the fence about switching over to it, maybe that gives you a bit of a push to go and try it out and see what the AUR is actually like. So I think that's going to be pretty much everything for me, but before I go, I would like to thank my supporters. So a special thank you to Chris, Joachim, Donald, Michael, Andre, Nathan, David Monza, Will, Brennan, Chico Bento, Jamie, Joseph, Mitchell, Peter D, Stephen, Tony Tushar, and all my $2 supporters. I'll leave a link to all of the videos that I've done on the AUR down below, so feel free to go and check those out. If you want to go and watch my podcast, that is Tech Over Tea, available basically anywhere, and then this channel is available on Odyssey, Library, and BitChute if you want to watch on a platform that isn't YouTube. So I think that's pretty much everything for me, and I'm out.